In previous videos, we've seen that ESG is not actually based on anything tangible. There are 6 principles of responsible investment, but none of them are actually principles. So what is ESG actually based on? Well, that's what we're going to uncover in this video. To see the true principles of ESG, you have to stand back slightly. And the first is that this is all about performance. It drives everything, and everything subordinates to it. That is explicitly stated in the ESG Charter known as the Principles for Responsible Investment. Its opening refrain reads, "In this fiduciary role, we believe that environmental, social and corporate governance issues can affect the performance of investment portfolios." So it's all about performance. Look, I love free markets, but I also know that free markets don't solve everything. You need an ethical stance that is separate from the profit motive. Most people assume that's what ESG does, but it's very explicitly not doing that. 20 years ago, everyone knew there was a financial domain and an ethical realm, and they were separate. ESG has swept everything before it and said, no, everything can come under our rubric of ESG performance. Now, there is probably a correlation between moral conduct and profits, but to completely conflate the two seems to me the opposite of what most people would think this entire project is about. If you think through the implications of that, you get to some very distasteful conclusions. So, for example, if women on boards or racial equality is an ESG issue, it means it's a performance issue, according to the PRI. Now, think tanks will do all they can to provide evidence that, let's say, more disabled people in the boardroom results in better corporate performance. But in doing so, you've already accepted the principle that should the data show that more disabled people or women or racial minorities decrease performance, this should logically precipitate an ESG-sanctioned backlash. So here is the problem with the PRI, and there's no getting around this. By conflating ethical positions with performance, every ethical action becomes financially contingent. That is the fatal flaw of ESG and what makes it definitionally unethical. Not just this, but ESG, it sucks out all the air of the boardroom. I've seen this. So when it comes to looking at real ethical dilemmas, the directors feel like they've ticked all those boxes. ESG policies have in fact eaten ethics for breakfast, to the point that people don't really understand what you're talking about when you talk about ethics in a business context anymore. That's how quickly it's happened. Now, there is actually one more principle, not the 6 that they advertise. It's the real principle, the reason everyone signs up to this stuff. And I was sure it was there on the PRI's website. Turns out it's been redacted, never publicly renounced. But it was the main reason everyone signed up. I had to use the Wayback Machine to find it. And it's on the benefits of signing the principles. And it's this: reputation management. Now, I would argue this is still the main attraction of ESG and the main driver of the industry. And that's a big problem because it matters why you do something. Pretty much every philosopher of the Western tradition agrees on that one thing. And I think that's because in complex systems with high information asymmetry, the chances of you hitting your target are small enough. But if you aren't really aiming at that target, you're just pretending to look good, then you're never going to hit it consistently. And so acting purely to promote your reputation is a policy that makes a mockery of acting in good faith. And that's how you create a trillion-dollar trompe-l'oeil. There's also a direct link between this and greenwashing. That's the problem that all good ESG advocates worry about. But they all ask the wrong question. They ask, how do we prevent it? Whereas they should ask, why is it so ubiquitous? And the reason is this: it's not a side effect of ESG. It's the central motivation and incentive. It's there in black and white, or was, in the founding document of the ESG industry, if you care to look. Another way to recognize when you've strayed out of the ethical domain is when attention shifts from the specific to the standardized and from the qualitative to the quantitative. This is precisely what ESG does. Data collection is the primary role of the ESG industry. This is what ESG officers do for a living. They aren't grappling with nuanced questions of ethical dilemma. They are gathering data. There's nothing qualitative about it. All ethical situations are qualitative and context specific. In every sense, ESG is the opposite of what it sounds like and what you'd expect. but now you understand why. I actually think, by the way, that the focus on quantification and standardization is something like a yearning for the certainty of a founding principle. It's why the ESG industry keeps going round in circles, trying to continuously improve their reporting and get ever more precise. But precise about what? There's no foundational ethic. Thou shalt not lie, steal, cheat. In fact, all of that's permitted. You could even say implicitly condoned by ESG. So the many decent, moral people who adopt it are lost when they seek an ethic behind it. Rather than the certainty provided by a moral principle, they have to rely on what sounds good. And so we get this emergent Machiavellian morality that's eating the corporate and financial world. It's insidious, and it results, frankly, in a multi-trillion-dollar lie. By the way, I feel very sorry for all these ESG officers. They were usually very young graduates, sold a lie by old men and women who should have known better. And it's not them who will suffer the fallout of this vainglorious experiment. Now, even if you haven't been paying directly through your pension, savings or insurance premium for ESG, although I guarantee you have, in Europe this has spilled over into regulation. And look, I'm no fan of market intervention, but EU regulators were quite reasonable when they looked at this stuff and realised it was political machination and needed regulating. Personally, I would have started with an outright ban on investment fiduciaries politically misappropriating retirement savings, which is what ESG amounts to. The Americans have done precisely this, by the way. But instead they came up with some utterly ineffectual rules, such as the SFDR, a piece of regulation that even its initial fans now admit has been a complete failure. It's done nothing, or less than nothing, to benefit the natural world, society, or anything else. And it would have cost EU taxpayers about €500 million to put together, as a conservative estimate. And then the same again every year in compliance costs from the private sector, all because of the private sector's adoption of ESG. There's much more I could say on the topic, but hopefully this is enough to make it clear to people that whatever good they thought they were doing by supporting this framework, they've really been misled. Now, let me just deal with one common heckle that I typically get at this point, which is that, okay, this might all be true, but we have to do something. The planet is burning, the polar bears are dying, etc., etc. Implicit in this type of comment is not only the assumption that people entrusted with other people's money have the right to expropriate it according to their determination of society's broader goals, but also that when it comes to top-down solutions to complex problems, the assumption is that something is better than nothing. Well, if there's one lesson from 200 years of social science, it's that the opposite's the case, that the chances that your scheme will have your desired effect and only that effect are zero, and that the chances it will have unforeseen consequences that are net negative to your stated goals are very high. So no, the "we must do something" argument, that's just the last refuge of an elite desperately clinging to an unaccountable power. I know from experience this can be quite an emotive topic, so if you have different views, please share them. And you can also ask me anything in the comments and I'll respond. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up so I know you want more like this. And if you're interested specifically in private markets investment topics, please subscribe to the channel. Until next time.